And let me test out that I can share my screen. More. There we go. Okay, great. Someday I want to meet the voice of the woman who records the Zoom, recording in progress.
Yeah, absolutely. So
okay, can you guys see that then?
We can, yes.
Okay, wonderful.
And then the thought, usually what we do, Dr. Fu, is we wait till like 5 or so after 7 until all of the participants are able to come in, and then
that sounds good. Do whatever you guys need to do. I'll just leave it like this so we don't mess it up.
Sounds good.
And, yeah. My son, like I said, just finished his last day of 7th grade. He got to turn in his school computer. He was so happy, Here you go. I'm not doing Zoom anymore. And he's looking forward to being in person in the fall.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, so a couple more people are showing up here, and I'm going to just accept anybody who comes in and wants to be on.
Yes.
So
hi, Kevin. And welcome, Nathan and Diane.
Yeah.
Kevin, how was your day?
It was good. How was yours?
It was great. It's always lovely to see you over Zoom because we have never seen each other in person somehow.
Right.
I don't actually understand how, but it has happened that way.
Yeah, that is strange.
Are the guys excited about their outing tomorrow?
They are.
Yay.
Yes, they are very excited. Same bat time, same bat location?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, we, Dr. Fu, we take the veteran treatment court guys out into the woods.
Oh, wonderful.
Kevin is both in charge of that and on our board, which we are honored and excited to.
Wow, good for you.
Yeah.
Where do you guys go? Like, what's your location you're going to be at?
So we're permitted in Pisgah, in multiple different areas, as well as all of DuPont State Park. And then we are, because we're a nonprofit, we can use all of Conserving Carolina's lands.
Oh, wow.
So all of that's open to us as well, which is awesome. But we also take our middle school program to Richmond Hill Park and Carrier Park, since they really enjoy the running around.
I bet they do. I bet they do. Now, which middle schools do you guys work with then here in town?
We run a middle school after school program with a nonprofit in town called Open Doors.
Okay.
Whose mission used to be ending the cycle of poverty through education, but they have changed their mission, and unfortunately, I don't know off the top of my head what their new mission is.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, you guys are all doing good work, and I appreciate any effort that you guys can do to bring us all back to nature and back to what I think is probably our natural state. So yeah. Good for you.
It's an honor, really, honestly. Also, welcome, Renee. And hi, Nathan's face. How are you?
Doing well. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad.
Had a good meal.
You had a good meal? That's always the best.
Yeah.
Nice. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, so Bex, I think there's going to be at least one picture of a person in this slideshow that you haven't seen, and I'm sure you'll recognize. So I'm sure I'll hear a yelp of happiness when you see that on that slide. It's about 3/4 of the way through.
Awesome. I will keep that. I will keep my eyes peeled.
Yeah.
Also, welcome to the call, Jackson. How are you? If he can hear me. Said he connected to the audio. So.
Dr. Fu, do you have you done some research with Jason Winger?
I sure have.
Hey.
So yeah, I guess about 6 or 8 years ago, we did a study on seniors and how well they balance and how their proprioception receptors, may change or degrade with age. And yeah, that was really wonderful. He's a brilliant guy.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, he sang your praises.
Oh,
I played
I
music
was
with him.
so happy to work with him. You know, we have some follow-up ideas from that study, and we've all been busy on other things. But you know, he's a licensed physical therapist as well as a PhD. And so when I floated the idea that we were going to take seniors and you know, have them close their eyes and stand on one foot on a force plate, he didn't blink. So, you know,
Wow.
I was just holding my breath the whole time, thinking, "Oh my God, I sure hope nobody falls." And
Right.
but he did great. He did great. So he has this
Very
personality that is so comforting. I think I would trust him to ask me to do anything, really. Yeah. How do you know him, Kevin?
Well, I first met him through UNCA. He was my advisor like a
Oh.
decade ago. And then he plays stand-up bass also. So I've played music with him.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah. So, boy, I got to look. I have one of his CDs, and maybe you're on that CD, Kevin.
Could be. It's been a while, but yeah, I remember the proprioception study he did with you. That's really cool.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we met a whole bunch of characters. We first started recording people up at Ollie, which is the senior living center at the UNCA, and we found that their balance was amazing, like 20-year-olds. And so then we realized, oh, these are not normal seniors, and what we have to do is find a more regular population. So we went downtown to a number of residential homes and sites, and then we could see normal aging people, and it was quite a stark difference. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. That was a fun study.
Well, it is 7:06. So we can either wait another couple of minutes. I know we're missing a bunch of humans in this moment right now, or you can go ahead and begin and let people in as they come. It's up to you.
I think I'll do the latter, only in that, Bex, you said I have 30 minutes and you know me, so I have about an hour and a half of material.
Yeah.
And so let me apologize first in advance and thank everybody at Pivot Point to invite me. It's really exciting to be here and talk about this confluence of neuroscience and meditation and mindfulness. And so I think my enthusiasm for the topic is going to come through on these slides. And like I said, I probably put way too much stuff in here because I wasn't sure how much, brain anatomy or neuroscience that you guys are comfortable with. So my hope is I'm probably going to mention things that may, light off a little light bulb in your head, which would be great. If you have any extra questions, please stop me. But I'm hoping that I'm just a little more comprehensive than you really want, so that you'll have the bug, like Bex got, to really get interested in neuroscience. There's so much more to the story, but I'm really happy to start you off with this. So with that said, let me go to the next slide here. And what I'd like to do before we talk about the part number 3, which is what is the newest science in the field of contemplative neuroscience, I thought I would put 2 parts in the header here. One is just a little bit of a review of different parts of the brain. Obviously, in neuroscience, our job is to understand the mind, but we start from a hypothesis that the mind comes from neurons, and the mind comes from tissue, and the mind comes from stuff, right? And so instead of thinking about a mind-body separation, our sort of mission statement here is to think about the elements here in this 3.5-pound part of your body and how that might create the mind. And if there's one thing that we really have learned in studying the brain over the last hundreds of years, is that the brain has lots of different parts, and some of the parts have different jobs. I like to think of the brain as kind of like a modern office building, that if you actually get down into the basement, it actually is heated by a steam radiator. And it's got some junky old wiring from 100 years ago and some new wiring on top. And there's a combination of really old parts of the brain and newer parts of the brain. So that's really my aim in the first part of this talk, is to really give you just kind of a tour of the brain, so that when we do mention things like the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, you'll kind of know where that is, or at least have a good general idea. And then, of course, in the second part, I'm going to do just a very slight sort of historical view of how science has studied meditation and mindfulness. Over the years, there's been a number of attempts to try and quantify these very, very subjective things. And so we're going to see some, positive and maybe some negative aspects of that. And then, of course, finally, what I really want to get to is there are some newer advances in contemplative neuroscience in the last 5 years, 5 to 10 years, that have really kind of blown our minds as far as how we actually think these mindful states are existing in our brains. So like I said, I can't see any of you on my screen. So if you do have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and just throw it out. But let me move to the next slide and start with this idea. So all over this planet, there's a number of different species that have different levels of intelligence. And in neuroscience, one of the things we do or have tried to do very well is to try and compare across species. In other words, for human minds, everybody has a different brain and we have sort of different mental capabilities. But as a species, we can actually make some generalizations as to how the human brain and the human mind is different from a fish brain or a fish mind. And so this compare and contrast sort of strategy of comparative neuroscience, this is where we're going to start. The first thing I should say is on the bottom left, I'm not going to talk about octopi in this talk, although I've been recently really interested in them. Some of you might have seen that movie, My Octopus Teacher, which is really fascinating. And some of the latest science on octopi is that they're about as smart as dogs. And so they have actually a very different kind of brain than any of the other creatures on this slide. And that's because they don't have a backbone. So in the evolutionary tree of life, animals with a backbone are called chordates. So they have a backbone and a spinal cord, and then that gives rise to a number of very common features. And these are features we're going to see across fishes and frogs and birds and humans. So if we think about all those chordates, we all start off as, again, a single cell from your mother, a single cell from your father, right? This fertilized cell divides into 2, and then 2 becomes 4, and that further divides until, again, in the first couple of days of life, pretty soon we have hundreds of thousands of cells, maybe even millions of cells, right? This cell division results in something we call a blastula, which is this purple thing here in the center of the screen. The blastula is a little hollow ball of cells. So it's like a little soccer ball, and that's going to develop into our body and all our body parts, and then it will develop into our brain and mind. And the way this happens is actually really counterintuitive. The blastula has 3 different layers, an inner layer, a middle layer, and an outer layer. And of course, if we track those inner layer cells, we find that they turn into elements of our digestive tract and our circulatory system. And the middle layer cells turn into our bones and muscles. And the outer layers of the blastula turn into our skin. So it turns out that everybody, of course, expected that our brain, which is on the inside of our skull, was going to come from that inner layer of cells in the blastula. And in fact, through some careful tracing studies, we found out we were completely wrong. So here we have on this slide a segment of the outer layer of that soccer ball. And it turns out that the soccer ball gets a little thicker along a seam. Let's see if I can get the highlight here. And this seam gets thicker, and then it kind of grows and folds in upon itself until it's something we call a neural groove. So this would be a seam along the outside that soccer ball, which turns into a groove, and then the groove actually seals up and turns into a neural tube, right? In other words, the shocking idea here is that our brain comes from skin tissue, which is on the outside of our blastula. Now, of course, we know that this sealing up of the neural tube happens in about the first trimester of gestation, so around 3 or 4 months. And of course, if it doesn't happen correctly at the bottom of your spine, you have something called spina bifida. And you might actually have a little kink of your spinal cord coming out of your vertebrae here. And that is fixable. If you have the opposite problem where the neural tube has not sealed up at the top of your head, you have something called anencephaly, and that is not survivable, right? These poor children are born with no skull covering their cranium. And so you can actually see the brain tissue and it's exposed to the outside world. And of course, that's why it's not survivable. Again, the key idea here is that the outside skin of this blastula turns into a neural tube, which is going to form the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord of all these creatures that we've talked about, frogs and fish and birds and humans. So here's a little animation. That tube is actually going to grow and deform. At the very front end of that tube in red, this is going to turn into your cerebral cortex. So all these areas here in the brain model that I'm showing here. And again, you might have remembered these terms from a class you took, like frontal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, etc. That's going to overgrow and become huge in our species. The blue part is going to be our spinal cord, and it's going to remain a neural tube, as well as it will in fish and frogs. And the green part is going to turn into this brown area in the brain here, which is our cerebellum, which we're going to use for accurate movements. And the yellow area is going to turn into parts of the brainstem. What this means is, by the time we are born, we have this exaggerated, right, hugely exaggerated brain. And you can see how that red final area of the cortex grows and then overgrows everything like a mushroom, and it fills up our skull, so much so that our distended, extended skull makes childbirth quite dangerous for our species. So as many of you know, right, the bones of your skull are not sealed together at birth. This allows you to shape that skull a little bit so that birth becomes more easy and survivable for everybody. And then, of course, the skull is going to seal up and fully encase and protect that brain. So really what we're saying in these first couple slides is, even though we have the same organizational structure as fish and frogs and birds, right, the exact details of our species say that this cervical cortex, or the cerebral cortex, is going to be bigger in us than any of these other species. Right? And of course, it's going to have its wrinkly shape. Cortex means bark, and you can see the child's brain here at 9 months. It is really, really compacted inside that skull, and it's ready to learn and grow as much as it can, especially in those first 5 to 10 years. Now, again, there's a whole bunch of names in the brain, and so it's always a good idea to try and find if there's a heuristic, or at least an organizational plan, that we can kind of make guesses about their function. And so this comes from a scientist called Paul MacLean. He divided the brain into 3 different parts. The cortex that we've been talking about, this upper huge part in humans, is number 3. And we're going to learn that this is part of our brain, which we think is really responsible for rational thought, for long-term thought, and central executive kind of thought. We're also going to see that this kind of corresponds to what people call the panda mind in the world of meditation and mindfulness. Underneath the cortex, we're going to have another area, which is going to be the limbic system. And here's a limbic system here. This is our emotional brain. And so between the limbic system, we're going to learn how our bodies react to, again, different stimuli. What is dangerous and what is exciting and what is, reward seeking for us in the limbic system. We're going to kind of characterize this as the monkey mind from the world of meditation and mindfulness. And then finally, down at the very bottom in the basement of this, new office building is all the old systems which keep everything going. So the heating system, which is running on steam, for example, instead of electricity, that's what we're going to call the brainstem and the midbrain, and that's down here in the bottom. This part here is essentially the same thing that is in all of these other brains like fish brains and frog brains and snake brains, right? That is what we're going to be calling our physiological brain. So that's going to help us keep our breathing going when we're asleep and our heart beating, etc. So in general, what we're saying is if you go from the bottom up, you have a brainstem, which just keeps you alive. You have an emotional limbic system, which helps you learn about stimuli in the outside world. And then on the very top, as humans, we have this cortex, which I think will give us the parts or the tools that will allow us to achieve, again, what we're trying to go for in things like mindfulness and meditation. So as another attempt to try and make sense of all these brain parts, you can think of the brain as having 3 different parts or 3 different areas. If you've taken psychology before, you can also think of it as, again, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is on the right-hand side of this slide. So as Maslow and Rogers suggested, the very base of your psyche is you trying to satisfy your physiological needs, like making sure you have enough food right now or air right now, right? And then above that, we have safety needs, right? So are you in danger? Are you running from a predator? And then, of course, moving up that pyramid, they have things like love and then self-esteem and self-actualization. We're going to see roughly the same kind of organization of function as what Maslow and Rogers kind of suggested here. So let's start at the bottom as our physiological needs. As I described before, that's what we think our brainstem is doing. And you can see it circled here in purple, right? If your brainstem is not working, like it wasn't working for these polio patients, then you need to be able to be helped to breathe when you fall asleep. Let me say that again. If you have polio and it got up to your brainstem, you could think about breathing, and this would be fine all throughout the day. But as soon as you went to sleep, you would forget to forget to breathe. And then, of course, your body would go hypoxic, and then maybe you would perish. So here's what we did as a solution back then. This is a bunch of children, of polio patients. They are in a iron lung ward. So this is just a tube kind of system, and this pressurizes your chest so that you will automatically inflate your chest and breathe, or deflate your chest and exhale. Now, of course, with COVID-19, one of the things we have is that we have a disease which actually attacks us not just in the ability to breathe, but actually the lung tissues themselves. So it would not help a COVID patient if you have them in an iron lung, because the actual gas exchange is also damaged. And so for a COVID patient, you actually have to intubate them. And this involves, again, putting a tube of almost pure oxygen right down into their lungs. This is something that is so noxious. This is a stimuli that is so terrible for everybody because it's invading your throat that you have to put people basically in a medically induced coma to achieve it, right? All of these physiological needs, breathing here, for example, along with things like regulating your heart rate, as well as your hormones, this is what's happening down in our brainstem. And as Bex and other people know, right, you also have cranial nerves, which come right off the brain. They don't go down the spine before they leave to the rest of your body. And for our purposes, the one that's most interesting in this talk is number 10. And this is the vagus nerve. It comes right off the underside of the brain here, right at the brainstem. And again, look what it does. It regulates your heartbeat. It helps you go into fight or flight. It allows you to breathe when you're asleep. And it also has some functions for, again, growth and hormone regulation, your vagus nerve. So this is showing us there's a direct connection, a direct neural connection between the physiological systems of your body and your brain. And again, the hope is, as many of you have practiced mindfulness and meditation, many of those practices, if not all of them, have at least as a starting point, you regulating your breath, you becoming conscious of your breath, you changing the way you're breathing above and beyond what your body naturally wants to do. What we think is happening here is that your cortex is sending descending signals down to this brainstem and overriding this autopilot and saying, okay, I need to calm down my breathing right? Even though I want to hyperventilate because I'm nervous or scared, I can actually over control it or override it. And that's what we're thinking is happening. Your cortex is overriding your vagus nerve. We're going to see more examples of that again from the world of meditation. But again, I do find it really, really interesting that this is one area that seems to be common in all these practices, where instead of allowing your body to just run on autopilot, you are using this kind of panda mind or cortical control to adjust that to your liking. Now, I should say something about the cerebellum in the back. Just very briefly, this allows us to coordinate our movements. And so in things like walking meditation, you can walk on autopilot and just walk around the area. But of course, in walking meditation, we ask you to be conscious of that. How are you placing your feet? How are you adjusting for different changes in the surface of the ground or going over obstacles? That is partly due to, again, the cerebellum making very accurate movements. I think that's all I'm going to say about the cerebellum here. Suffice to say is that we actually have a very complicated cerebellum. Other creatures like the hagfish or the lamprey in the bottom picture here, they do not have a complex cerebellum. They basically swim around until they find a host, latch on, and then eat them, and then make more lampreys. So in the evolutionary world, what we found is by the time we got to bony fish like Nemo, then actually this was supported by a larger cerebellum. And of course, even larger than that was the bird cerebellum. We actually have a cerebellum that's actually quite big. You can see it here. We think that's actually been developed for hand-eye coordination as well as speech. So moving up from the brainstem, I just wanted to make one mention of many of the neurotransmitters that you probably are familiar with. So things like serotonin or norepinephrine or dopamine and acetylcholine. These are regulators of things like our fight or flight system and our emotional tone. These are also, again, parts of the brain chemistry that we can adjust with medication. And many of the patients that you guys work with, right, are on, let's say, serotonin enhancing drugs if they're suffering from depression. So all of that is taking place in the brainstem here. And so it's absolutely critical for your homeostasis and life. And so we should not ignore what's going on there in the brainstem. Although, as we're saying, we are learning there are practices that you can override the autopilot of the brainstem. A little higher up in the midbrain, we actually have these areas here in purple. These are kind of like automatic programs that allow us to duck out of the way as something's coming at our head so we don't get injured. It also allows us to track moving objects without really thinking about it. So these are kind of unconscious things that allow us to survive in a very fast-paced world. There are also areas in the midbrain here that allow us to have, again, hardwired reflexes. So when we lose our balance, let's say you're teaching a group of people how to rock climb for the first time, and they're up on the top rope, and all of a sudden, they slip, and you might see them, again, throwing their arms and legs out, arching their back, doing this moral reflex as if they are feeling like they're going to fall. Again, these are things that are in your body and in your brain on day one, the first day that you're born. And of course, these are part of the APGAR score that we test infants on. All of these are autopilot kind of systems. And in addition to these ones, which actually do motor output, there's other ones above it. In the forebrain, which we're showing here now in purple, that's just above here. These are now areas that we only find in mammals, essentially. And we think that mammals have a very interesting way that they raise their young. So in contrast to fish, which lay 1,000 eggs and then swim off, and then they know that of those 1,000 eggs, 995 are going to get eaten, on the first week of life, but maybe 5 will survive, right? In contrast to that, mammals have a very opposite child rearing strategy. Instead of laying 1,000 eggs, we lay 1 or maybe 2, right? And of course, we have a very intensive maternal care system of parenting. So I would put to you that instead of having romantic love, we think that this area of the forebrain actually runs maternal love. So this is that very strong mother-child bond. This is the part of your brain which makes you say, oh, when you see puppies, right? This is also the part of brain which runs a lot of your mammalian reflexes, like thermoregulation. So we're warm-blooded creatures and we can go all over the planet. You will notice that as people get to the end of their, let's say they get to menopause, one of the things they may have problems with is thermoregulation again. So these are all mammalian drives, including the 4 F's down here below. There are, again, parts of your mind which drive you to eat when you're hungry. There are parts of your mind which drive you to fight or flee when there's danger. Okay? It may be possible to override those feelings of fleeing or fighting or feeding or fornication. But again, that is a cortical thing on top of this sort of forebrain or brainstem thing. So put together with this limbic system and mammalian brain, there is a connector between that and our body. And many of you know this already. This is called the HPA axis. So the hypothalamus talks to the pituitary. It sends factors through the blood down to your kidneys and then releases adrenaline so you can do fight or flight. Right? Again, it's one of the hopes of mindfulness and meditation that you can consciously control this hypothalamic-pituitary-adrenal axis. Maybe we can downregulate our feelings of stress and anxiety, again, with some kind of non-medical or at least non-pharmaceutical kind of practice like meditation. And so just saying, that we have this emotional brain, the one last thing that we want to mention about the emotional brain is it also is a learning center. So many of you have heard of the hypothalamus, which is this seahorse shaped swoop in the limbic system, or many of you have heard of the amygdala. This was thought to be just a fear center in our brain, but now we know it's also an emotional regulation center. Right? These are all the parts of you which are operating under the level of consciousness, which make you do those 4 drives for a mammal. So flee, fight, feed, etc. Taken together, well, actually, I should put this here. This is one of Beck's favorite people, right? This is Alex Honnold, of course, and he is the first person to free solo climb Half Dome and El Capitan in Yosemite. So, of course, everybody was thrilled and excited that he did this, but we were also excited to scan his brain because it really doesn't seem like he's normal. And of course, he's really not normal. In a very unusual and just delightful way, his limbic system does not seem to react to fear stimuli in the way that everybody else's does. Another way to think about it is he's able to use his cortex to recognize his fear, but not succumb to it, right? And he can override what his limbic system is telling him when he's doing a climb like this. Right? So in a very similar way, we want to be able to train and teach people, can you override your system of breathing? Can you override your emotional system so that you can recover from just reacting to the world in the way that we normally do? So let me go to the next slide. Taken together, we're going to call this the monkey mind, and that's what we think is happening in the world of meditation and mindfulness. They describe the monkey mind as, again, a knee-jerk reaction to fearful stimuli. This is something that is stimulus-driven. So you can find yourself completely overwhelmed by modern life. You're multitasking and stimuli are coming in and you're trying to do your job. And then there's an emergency at work. And then your personal life is creeping in. All of this is bright stimuli for your limbic system. And you would expect your limbic system to go crazy trying to react to all of that. So like a sailboat in the ocean without a rudder, you're going to be swept around by all these incoming stimuli, which are going to talk to your limbic system and your brainstem areas. Right? Now we can actually test this in the lab, right? Because one of the ways we can see how well you can control this is to give you a stimuli, maybe even a visual stimuli that has lots of stuff on it that you have to focus to really see what's really important in that stimuli. And so here's a famous psychological example, right? If you can look at this scene and find Waldo without getting distracted by all the other figures in the scene, then you are overriding your monkey mind. And that's what we want you to be able to do. Okay. So again, that's your monkey mind. And on top of your monkey mind, we have your cortex, right? Now in intro psych, we talk about the cortex, the occipital lobe doing vision, and the temporal lobe doing hearing, and the parietal lobe doing, again, touch and pain. But I want to focus on the frontal lobe today because this is where we think we have executive functions, right? Again, so if we think about that red front of your neural tube, which got really big and overdrew everything else, right? Part of that neural tube, especially the red part, which of course, unfortunately is in blue in the figure above, is your frontal lobe. And we're going to learn that part of that frontal lobe we think is the part that we want to really encourage in the world of meditation and mindfulness. Now, again, this is not a new idea in psychology. Other people have tried to get down to what that frontal lobe does. There was a very famous book just a couple of years ago by Roy Baumeister who suggested that willpower is centered in the frontal lobe. And by and large, he's probably right. I have a couple of bones to pick with him about exactly the mechanism that he thinks is happening there. But by and large, one thing that is true about your frontal lobe is that it's part of your cortex, and your cortex is an energy hog. It's only 2% of your body, but it takes 10 times that in weight in terms of, again, the amount of oxygen it's using, a lot of sugar it's using. It must be doing something. And Baumeister's idea is that you need all that energy to drive the frontal lobe so that it can override your limbic system and your 4 Fs, and it can override your system of breathing, etc. So again, we're pretty sympathetic with Baumeister's view here. Again, if you guys have worked with patients that have frontal lobe damage, right, either through alcoholism or maybe through lesions or other kind of head injuries, one thing that is very clear with frontal lobe patients is they have a really hard time switching categories or switching the way they respond to stimuli. So one of the ways you can test this is with the Wisconsin card sorting task. You have people essentially look at these cards and match them up in terms of shape or switch from shape to color, right? You could switch, for example, categorizing all the triangles together to now categorizing all the yellow things together, even though they're triangles and stars. This is something that people with head injuries have a really hard time doing, and especially head injuries in the frontal lobe area. So we think this is one key thing that the brain is doing when it's switching the way you react to stimuli, it's using that frontal lobe. Now, other people have really tried to figure out what that frontal lobe is evolutionarily. One of the best ideas about this actually comes from a guy from Caltech who says that the frontal lobe probably developed in our species as it has in elephants and dolphins and other primates because we're social creatures. So being a social creature and having to work within a group and having a hierarchy in the group is so complicated that that's probably the evolutionary pressure for us to develop this very expensive and energetic frontal lobe. And so even within the frontal lobe, there's part that's a subpart of the frontal lobe, which is even more important, especially for our talk today. And we call this the prefrontal cortex. It's right behind your forehead, right above your eyes, and it's here in blue, right? So if you're a specialist and you've heard of these terms before, these include the medial prefrontal cortex, the postcingulate cortex, the parietal and hippocampus parts. These are, again, parts that are hugely exaggerated in us versus all the other creatures on this planet. Now, what does this thing do, right? Well, one thing that we have found out that it does, which completely surprised us, is that it is always active, and it's especially active when we're daydreaming, right? This came as a complete surprise. Imagine what the experiment was like. We have a patient, we put them in a scanner, we're gonna have them do a very complex cognitive task like counting backwards or doing trigonometry. And when they're doing that, their brain is really active. But you have to compare that brain with what their brain is doing when they're resting. And everybody thought that the resting brain would actually be less active. And it turns out that the resting brain is actually more active in this prefrontal area. This came as a complete surprise, and now we call this the default network, and we don't know exactly what it does, but we have a couple clues. Okay. Some of the states that people get into subjectively from meditation and mindfulness echo what you might see in some types of drug use, especially psychedelic drug use. Right? And so again, when people are under the influence of psychedelics, sometimes they report, again, leaving their body or feeling less in their body and feeling more at one with the universe. Now, when people did this, everybody expected that what was probably happening is that their brain is on overdrive. It's especially active because they're becoming, I guess, one with the universe or something special like that. In fact, some early studies have shown, and we can confirm these, that actually when you're on psychedelics like psilocybin mushrooms, that default network in that frontal lobe actually decreases in activation. So it's working in an exact opposite way than we thought it was. Nevertheless, this is correlated with what people are now characterizing as ego dissolution. So this is new work that one way that you can read more about it is to read this book by Michael Pollan. There is a lot of work going on now with psychedelics and how they may be of medical benefit. Okay. Other people have studied something similar in this wandering or sort of daydreaming mind. There was a Harvard study that was done on a bunch of undergraduates. They asked people what they were thinking about when they were kind of daydreaming. And unfortunately, what they found was a lot of them were thinking negative thoughts, right? Self-doubt or things they didn't do or incidences from the past that they regretted, right? There is some controversy over this study, and they've been trying to replicate this. So it may not be as negative as the first results seem to suggest, but it does seem to say that there's something going on when you are completely at rest with this default network. From the world of sports psychology, this is very close to what Michael Csikszentmihalyi has described as flow, where you're in a situation, like a sporting situation, where the needs and demands of that situation almost perfectly match your abilities. And so people say time stops, right? For Alex Honnold, time stops when he climbs. We think he's actually using that default network in a way very similar to what we're seeing in these psychedelic experiences. So taken together, the frontal lobe, we think, is that panda mind. This is that part of your brain, the grown-up part of your brain, that makes you do the harder thing when it's the right thing to do, right? So again, we just passed 4 o'clock, and as Bex knows, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it is so hard for me to avoid and not eat cookies, because it's that time of day that I just need a little energy boost, and I think, oh my God, these Oreos look great. If I can resist those cookies, then I think it's actually my frontal lobe that's doing it, right? If I just do and go with the flow, I'm going to be eating cookies and eating more than I should. But again, it's this frontal cortex, which we think is the overriding part of our mind. And if you take nothing else from the talk today, that's the best thing you can take from it. Practices in meditation and mindfulness are designed, we think now, are designed to develop this frontal cortex, especially this prefrontal area. They're designed to help you focus your attention and practice focusing your attention so that you listen less to what's happening in these brainstem areas or limbic system areas. We think that these meditation and mindfulness practices allow you to override that fear response, right, that you might have when you're at a great height or you're learning how to rock climb for the first time, etc. Okay. So with that, let me just say a couple things about meditation, because I've been kind of conflating a couple things. So meditation is not exactly the same as mindfulness. And of course, my colleagues will tell me that these practices are religious practices and they come from a long religious tradition. And so as a neuroscientist, I'm a little agnostic about that. I'm trying to find out the main effect of these different practices. Can we do them without the religious overarching over context here? And will those actually change our brain or our mind? Okay. Again, one thing that, as I mentioned before, it seems to be so interesting to me is that almost all of these practices, whether they are strictly religious ones or secularized ones like MBSR, right? Listening to your breathing, controlling your breathing, paying attention to your breathing and then bringing your attention back if you have your mind wander. This seems to be very common in a large range of meditative practices. And so again, in the field right now, there's a lot of different controversy. Should we call it mindfulness? Can we call it something else like just mental hygiene, right? What is the pros and cons of all those things? From where I'm sitting as a neuroscientist, that part doesn't interest me as much as, again, can these practices actually change your brain? Can we show definite changes in the tissues of your brain and then show, again, corresponding behavior changes? So let me just say something about directing attention. This is something from William James, who was a psychologist from many years ago. He believed that focusing one's attention and practicing the focus of one's attention could really bring benefits to your mind, but he had no idea how we could do this. And what I'm trying to tell you today is that actually we do know how to do this now. We can take some of the practices from mindfulness and meditation and use this to bring your attention back if it starts to wander. And through practice of this, then we can actually have more benefits in the long term. And so here's that slide of finding Waldo. Can you parse out all the distractors and actually find Waldo? That's one way to get at it. Let me give you just a couple more. Bex knows this from psychology. There's the Stroop task, where we ask you not to read the words like blue, red, and yellow and orange, but to tell us the font color. So you have to inhibit saying blue and actually say green or purple or yellow, etc. What I would suggest to you and the populations you guys are working with is you could actually probably do this through different sports practices. So again, especially with certain types of sports, which are very open-ended, we've tried this in our classes with slacklining, and I think Bex will recognize the person there. But you guys might see this as well when people go rock climbing for the first time, or get on the water for the first time, or mountain bike for the first time. They're in a challenging environment that's rapidly changing, and they are being forced to really pay attention to their balance and their breathing. And all of these, I think, could also be used as ways to focus one's attention, right? And then get those benefits in the world of mindfulness. And let me just talk about one other type of meditation here, and then I'll cut it short and ask for questions. But the other way that we think mindfulness is really important is in this practice of compassion meditation. So again, this is often called metta meditation. I didn't even know about this 5 years ago, but instead of just focusing on your breathing and inside yourself and your body awareness, this starts to focus your attention on people around you and beings around you, and your wish for them to be happy, and your wish for them to be well and safe and peaceful. And this doesn't have to be people that you know, and it doesn't even have to be people that are alive. It can be pets, right? Generating this type of compassion intention seems to have real benefits in the way your brain is activated and works. And so we've actually tested this and shown this in scanner work. You can actually, well, let's go beyond this. You can actually put people in a scanner and have them try to decode the emotions of other people. You can have them look at pictures of people's eyes and guess what is their emotional state. Are they playing or irritated or bored? The control condition is to have the same or different people in the scanner, just have them identify them as males or females. If you have people practice this, not only do they get better at being empathetic and understanding what other people are showing with their eyes, and that's this graph here, the meditators get better at this, but we actually find this changes the brain. So connectivity areas between that prefrontal lobe and your limbic system actually increase. As I mentioned before, the amygdala is not just a fear center. We think the amygdala is actually an emotional regulation or radar for your brain. And we think there are, again, and we can show, there are changes in the way your brain is responding to these stimuli. It's almost as if you are mirroring those emotions that you see out there. And so I'll just say one more last slide here. And thank you for your patience. Some of the latest work that's happened in the science of meditation, you can see in this book by Danny Goleman and Richie Davidson. They actually took a group of about 30 monks that have practiced meditation for 30 years and 40 years of, at a time. And so these are expert Olympic level meditators. And when we put them in the scanner and actually watch their brains, they do some really interesting things. And I'll just highlight one of them here. Here it is. We all know from Pavlov that if I ring a bell and then shock you or give you some kind of pain, over repeated stimuli, you're going to start to feel that pain and anticipate that pain when you just hear the bell. That's basic psychology. We think this is the same in animals and people and every one of us in our species. What we have found with these long-term meditators, and they stay in the moment and try and stay in their mindful state, after repeated practice with this, when the bell rings and they know it's going to injure them, they actually do not have the brain activity of anticipating that pain. In other words, they report, well, there's the bell. I know I'm going to suffer because you're going to give me a painful stimuli, but I'm not going to suffer twice. So when that stimuli, the bell comes, they do not show any of those limbic system fight or flight responses. They do show it when actually the pain is present. So they are suffering in that case, but they don't pre-suffer or anticipate that suffering. And that's just one of the remarkable things that we see in these monks' brains. Their brains are, again, you could look at the white matter, gray matter, and show that they're basically brains that are 10 years younger than we would expect them to be with their age. So again, I know I've gone way past my time here, but I just want to thank you for your attention here. What I can say here in 2021 is there is a growing body of evidence that using mindfulness and meditation to practice things like focusing your attention, using mindfulness and meditation to practice things like compassion, this seems to have real cumulative effects and really can change the way that your brain is wired. And so we think this is going to be thought of, hopefully, as a daily skill. It's something that we could all put into our routine, just like brushing our teeth, right? It's not natural for us to brush our teeth. And again, usually, like with people in prehistory, they lost their teeth after 20 or 30 years. We don't have to do that. We can override that just like we're overriding our breathing and autopilot responses, and we can actually bring ourselves to a more enlightened or at least mentally healthy state. So I'll stop there and I'll stop the share and send the hosting back and take your questions now. How do I do this? Need to do this like this. So Matthew, I'm going to make you the host here. And there we go. Thank you so much for your attention. And yeah, any questions or comments?
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. I'm really excited that you guys are interested in this. Again, this is something that as a hardcore neuroscience, I was really skeptical about this until I started seeing the newer scientific research, which again is maybe 5 to 8 years old. So we are really starting to see, especially with these expert monk meditators, real differences in their gray matter and white matter. So it gives us a lot of hope. Yes, sir, Jackson.
I've got a question. Have you looked into the differences between, you mentioned like the monks focusing on their breath,
Yeah.
which would, from when I've looked into it, would be defined as like closed focused meditation. Have you looked into the difference between closed focused and like transcendental meditation, which is where, for example, when people chant Hare Krishna, and are trying to connect with like the God and all that. Have you looked at like fMRI studies?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jackson. And so, you know, science progresses very slowly. Even 20 years ago, all we could show in MRIs of the brain was, boy, when I hear you talking, the auditory areas of my brain are lighting up. Right? We're kind of limited by our tools. And in that respect, we are kind of limited in the types of meditation that we can measure right now. You mentioned transcendental, which is a great one. But so much is happening in the brain when people are in that state. We can't sort out the noise from the signal in that just yet. So that's going to take a little more study, but I'm glad you mentioned it. Yeah.
Ooh, interesting.
Yep. In other words, let me give you a trivial example. I could ask a person to go into scanner and say, okay, now I want you to think about your God, whoever your God is, right? And your brain will have some kind of activity. And then I could say, okay, now I want you to go into the the scanner and just let your mind wander, or I want you to think about the color orange. You could subtract scan number 1 from scan number 2. And then the part that's left over is the part that was there when the person was thinking about their God, right? That's not really good science, right? Because that, that is the part that's left over, but is that really the part, is that the God part of your brain? We don't think the brain actually works in that kind of separate, independent system like that. So our science is just trying to catch up to that. But I love that you asked that question. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that with the monks, they say that, in kind of studies of yogic philosophy, they're talking about kind of alleviating suffering by practicing non-attachment. And that's in so much of it. But then we find with the brain scans that they're actually alleviating suffering by not attaching to the suffering. I think that's
yeah. I mean, it's quite shocking and just kind of thrilling to see the beginnings. It's almost like the world of meditation's up here, and science is crawling up here and looking over these vistas and saying, "Oh my God, I guess that was right," or "Oh, I guess that was a real thing." So it's exciting to be in the field right now and see that.
For sure. Or like Western science is like, wow, Eastern science, this is legit. And Eastern science is rolling their eyes.
That's right. That's right.
Like we've known this forever.
Yeah. That's a great point. I mean, often I lay awake at night and I think, gosh, are we just enticing people to do these practices, which again are perfectly valid practices and parts of these religions, but we slap the label neuroscience on it and put it on a phone app, and now it's popular and people are doing it. And yeah, do I really want to be involved with that? And I guess when I wake up in the morning, I say, what we should be doing is the greatest good we can, right? And so if we can get more people interested in this, then okay, that's fine. Start with the phone app. If that gets you to meditate more, and if it gets you to be able to regulate your emotions more, then yeah, that's a big win. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, Dr. Fu, this is Diane Pruitt.
Hi, Diane. Yes.
Hi. Just kind of give you a little bit of brief history of my background. I am the founder and president of Guiding Reins. We are an equine assisted therapy program for veterans,
okay,
active duty military personnel, first responders. And what we do in our sessions, we again have incorporated breathing exercises before we get started with our sessions with the horses, and just trying to get these veterans to focus their attention on their time with the horses. That it's fascinating to me that a 1,000-pound animal can give a nonverbal cue.
Yeah.
To make a veteran realize and look at me and say, "Oh my gosh, you just in 2 sessions with this animal took me 4 years sitting in a therapist's office to realize I walk with my eyes looking out." Anyway, is there anything and in talking with the veterans that have gone through our program, it's really, really interesting for them to talk about how well they feel when they leave the session. One veteran says, "My wife says I always sleep better on Tuesday nights because I've been to Guiding Reins." So we were like, how can we get them to hold on to that feeling, until they get back to us next week? And one veteran has said, depending on the kind of week I have, sometimes it stays with me 2 days, sometimes 4 days. Is there anything else we could do to get them more focused on their attention when they're with the horse and in our therapy sessions?
Yeah, that's a great question, because again, I think you're getting to something which is at the heart of where the science is right now, is like, how can we take these temporary benefits and turn them into long-term traits?
Right. Let them take them with them when they leave.
Last the whole week, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. And this kind of comes back to the monk problem, right? So we have 30 monks or so, and they're like these amazing Olympic level kind of mental athletes. We don't know if the reason why they're that good is that all the other monks of their generation dropped out, or whether all this practice over 30 or 40 years has made it permanent in their brains, right? The only way we could test that is take about, 100 random children and then half put them in the, practicing condition, half not, and then see what happens in the end. But it is true that the monks are showing these very persistent kinds of qualities. So where we're taking is we're starting with this assumption, okay, maybe this is something that can be learned. Maybe this is something that can be practiced. If you deviate from that mindfulness point, maybe you recover faster. In other words, everybody's heart goes fast when they run up the stairs, but if you're in good shape, your heart goes back to this resting rate faster. And that seems to be the hope right now. It is also a thing that, like I've given this kind of presentation to groups like my brother. My brother's in law enforcement. So I changed the language a little bit. You guys are going to laugh. So instead of talking about mindfulness and focus, right, and writing a gratitude journal, I tell them, okay, now you've had this session. Let's write an after action report. So tell me what your breathing was doing. Tell me what your emotions were doing, right? Can you focus on, they're focusing on marksmanship. So again, can you focus enough of your breathing so that your long range marksmanship doesn't suffer from fight or flight? And gosh, I feel of two minds about this, but by changing the language a little bit, what I can show them is, I was like, look, this doesn't come easy or for free for the Navy SEALs either. This doesn't come easy or for free for the Rangers either. They practice this type of breathing. They go through high stress situations in training, particularly just to get to that mindset that they can always at least control their breathing and get back to sort of baseline. So I'm sorry, we don't have a magic answer yet of this, but at least we have, like for that group, role models, right? If they can show that the aim is to get back to that state that you were there with the horses, right? And then keep that in the front of your mind and practicing enough, maybe that'll become easier. And I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you for that.
No, I mean, and we will coach that, and we tell them that is to remember that moment when they're having that session with the horse, when they start to have an anxiety attack, when they're standing in line at lows, to just try to hold on to how they felt when they were with their horse. But we're just still trying to figure out how can we get them to get more focus, more attention, like you said, to just it's tough, but we're making good progress, and we've had some really, really good results. And to hear a veteran say, boy, I felt good for the last 5 days until I could get here on the 7th day. So that's our goal. We talked about this. It's like, gosh, what can we do to get them to hold that good feeling for the week until they get back to us the following week?
Yeah, no, I applaud all your efforts. The other role models I always give people in another context is if it's a sporting context, I tell them, hey, Olympic athletes, they don't stay in shape if they just lay on the couch. They know that the rest day means, an active rest, or they're always working on other skills. And so again, in a lot of ways, this mental practice has a lot of analogy with physical practice. In order to keep your skills up and fresh, you kind of have to keep at them. But if you can incorporate that into your daily, regimen, that's where the long-term changes come, we think.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Other questions? I love that, Diane, like you mentioned that the horses are such great ambassadors of this. I mean, I often joke that the way we relate to other mammals can be so deep and just transcend our species, and maybe octopi too at this point. But definitely, I don't think I could kind of mind meld with a cockroach or something that's not really a mammal. And so probably because they have that limbic system, they're watching us, and they're so attuned to all of our body language in such a way that we often just forget. So I think it's wonderful, the program you have.
Well, it's the fight or flight is a horse's fight or flight. So they identify with that clearly. And then the horses, and what I tell the folks is that they need, when we start our breathing exercises, is to be present in the moment, because that's how a horse lives. And if you're not present, if you don't create your mind to be an inviting space, if you create it to be an inviting area, then if you're lucky, your horse will invite you into theirs. And you see them and they kind of think, oh, okay. Because if you're not present, they really don't want to be. I've watched horses, they've done it to me. They walk off. I mean, they just are like, you know what, too much for me, too much discussion, too much going on in the brain. So we're really trying to get them to quiet those minds before they get in there with that horse, because we see a big difference. And so we thought, is there something else we could do besides breathing exercises?
So again, presumably a lot of the autonomic system responses, right? So not just breathing, right? But if people are pretty good at monitoring their heart rate, right? Or they're, are your palms sweaty? Do you have butterflies in your stomach, right? All these kinds of changes are part of that autonomic nervous system, that HPA axis. And presumably those can all be part of your conscious thoughts. So any and all of those, Diane, I think could be things that people could monitor. Yeah.
Right. The other thing too is when we do our breathing exercises, I have them I welcome them. They want to hug their horse, but I make sure they put at least one hand on their horse, because the horse will emulate their heart rate with theirs. And then you see them subconsciously, because then I would be like, okay, I need to calm down. Ben, so that I think helps. So I try to put all these little bugs in there, just the trigger points to say, now think what you're really, really doing here. Because I told them, I said, if you hit the gate and you're jacked up and fired up, your horse will be too, and he'll be hard to control. So
it sounds like a wonderful partnership that the horses can
really cool. Yeah, we're in Tryon. If you ever want to come down for a visit, I mean, I'd love to have you. It's just fascinating to watch.
You're gonna laugh when I get on a horse, though, Diane. Oh boy.
Yeah.
But I might take you up on that someday.
Yeah, you can come. Maybe just come observe a session. Yeah. So it's really fascinating. It's fascinating to me what they can do.
Wonderful.
That's cool, Diane. Where is your company based out of?
We're actually, right here in Landrum in South Carolina. We're operating out of 2 farms, one in Tryon, North Carolina. We're right here on the state line.
Yeah.
And then one here in Campobello, Landrum and Spartanburg County. So it's, cool. I saw this population. Well, I'm, born and raised around horses. So what's better for me is, working with horses and helping people in the same sentence. Wonderful. Yeah. If any of y'all, it's just fascinating. And I've done a lot of volunteer work with therapeutic riding programs, but I saw this population that wasn't being served, mainly, veterans, first responders, active duty personnel. And so I said, hey, y'all need to start a veterans program. They're like, great, you do it. And so I, tried it with this program for a couple of years, but then just, finally, decided if you want to do it right, I wanted to see more of a therapy, not, there's a therapeutic riding is like you and I going to get a massage, you feel good for the afternoon. I wanted to see actual therapy. They come once a week. Our program is 16 weeks. We do 8 sessions of groundwork, what we call groundwork. You make much more of a connection with a horse on the ground than you do in the saddle. I have some veterans that show up and say, when am I going to ride? I'm like, it's mandatory you do this. And then they don't know anything about it. And then when they get into it, everybody stops asking about riding. We have some veterans that show up and say, I don't want to ride. Those are fire breathing, man eating, I'm like, okay. And then after about 8 to 10 weeks, they're like, I think I want to try to ride. And then we do 8 weeks of mounted. We have a mental health therapist, a psychotherapist, and a physical therapist that's on hand as needed. But right now it's all mental health. Everybody's able-bodied. And then of course we've had family members now. For every veteran, I probably get a phone call for 2 or 3 family members, because as we know, the PTSD, the TBIs, affect the entire family.
Yep.
So
it's called guiding light, Diane?
Guiding reins, like reins, REINS, like on the bridle of a horse. Guidingreins.org. I got a grant through the VA, and that's the thing, is the grant covers the therapy for the veterans, but it does not cover it for family members. So that's where we're pushing for other fundraising and other grants that we're writing for. And only I would start a nonprofit, and then 3 months later we have a global pandemic. But you know what? we still grew. We started out with 2 veterans, 2 horses, 2 volunteers, and we're now at 15 veterans and 5 family members, and my phone's ringing off the hook. So
it's fabulous. I'll definitely check it out. Thank you.
Check it out. I'd love for y'all to come see it, because it's mind-blowing, and sometimes there's a lot of tears. And I mean, to see have these veterans say, I'm not disregarding all the therapy I've been through, but what you've done for me, just never happened sitting in a doctor's office. So it's pretty powerful. And so actually we're in negotiations with a farm in Flat Rock. To create a program for active duty military personnel. Had somebody fly in. I mean, I got a call like at 8 o'clock on a Friday night. Can you be here tomorrow at 2? Where the men and women are going off to Kosovo or Afghanistan, coming back, they are still fit for duty, but the lieutenant general said, but I'm very, very concerned. You can tell they have some mental issues that they're really struggling with. So they are asking us to write a program. He said, I can't send you my people for 16 weeks. Could you do something in 5 days? And, you know, and I'm kind of like, can we, you know, so again, it's then also you mentioned the app, creating something that they come to our program for 5 days, but when they leave, how do we mentor and follow them, as well as follow, you know, their well-being to, again, help me for research for grants. So I'm not an app person either. You know, somebody said, oh, there's an app. I'm like, that's too easy. Trying to create a mentor program, maybe where the folks could call in, they have a meeting once a month, and maybe we follow them for 12 months when they leave the program. So yeah, lots of, it's daunting, it's exciting. And and the Lieutenant General from Fort Bragg, he said, you don't need to sell me on equine therapy. I know it works, but he said, you know, I can't, what can you do for me in 5 days? And you think, how can, you know, what can we make a difference in 5 days? I think, yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, I swear the more I try to get on the like secular practice side of all these meditation and mindfulness things, the more I keep coming back to, you know, this is something that's 1,000 years old. And, you know, maybe we should actually go back to, like you said, you know, face to face with the horse, or face to face with a real person. And you know, these old practices, like, you know, maybe we should force you actually to sit for a couple hours in this lotus position. And I do find myself coming back again and again to the old school human connection type of that. So
you're right. The another practice we're trying, the Indians, the thing I like is that you walk up to your horse, you breathe your breath into the, and my guy, I do it to my guy all the time, and then he breathes out and you breathe in their breath. And you just again, just a moment, I said, let you know, exchange breaths. And they look at me like, what are you talking about? You know, and then when you demonstrate it, they're like, whoa. And I mean, the horse will pause and you can see that brain working. They are taking in your breath, and it's, then they were like, who taught you? I'm like, that is a very old Indian practice. That's they always did. That
my breath in you, your breath in me. Yeah.
Right. So we're kind of incorporating that as well. So it is,
that's fascinating. I think I got to get down there and check out and watch this session. That sounds
yes. We'd love to have you. Yes, be great. So we're still growing, learning, and just trying to really, really make a difference.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here, Diane.
Yes, no, this was great.
I appreciate you being here, and I hope we see you at future conferences.
You will.
And I'm also just so thankful that you came and talked, Dr. Fu. I realized while you were speaking how much I miss hearing your voice multiple times a week.
Well, I miss seeing your face, Bex, and I just there's nothing more exciting than have people you know, excited in the things you're excited about. And like I said, it's not a mystery that I get into this stuff. And boy, like Diane's saying, we just want to be able to learn something new and make a difference. And why can't that be our epitaph? So thank you all for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you for speaking, and I hope we see you guys in the future, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
Goodbye, guys.
Thanks, everybody. I put our website in the chat.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, have a great rest of your night.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank y'all for hosting. It's pretty cool having psychology people come out.
Yeah, I was excited that he wanted to come speak. He's one of my favorite professors and just really brilliant about all this stuff. I was like, it's gonna be fun to pick his brain. So
yeah, I didn't get to ask my last question, but that's okay.
What was it?
I wanted to ask what his dream experiment would be.
I bet he would have had a very interesting answer for you.
Yeah, if he's allowed to do anything he wants with people's brains.
Nice. Okay, cool. Well, goodbye, you guys, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Have a good one.
See you, Jackson. Bye.
Bye-bye.